The year was 1966. A sweltering summer had descended upon Texas, baking the small town of Everman under a relentless sun. Unbeknownst to its unsuspecting residents, a shadow was about to fall over their quiet community, a darkness that would etch its name in the annals of criminal history. This is the chilling tale of Kenneth McDuff, a name synonymous with unspeakable evil, a man who would come to be known as one of America's most notorious serial killers. McDuff's reign of terror began on a seemingly ordinary evening. Three teenagers, Robert Brand, Edna Sullivan, and Mark Dunman, vanished without a trace. Their disappearance sent shockwaves through the community, shattering the peaceful facade of small-town life. Fear gripped Everman as whispers of an unknown predator lurking in the shadows spread like wildfire. Days turned into agonizing weeks, hope slowly dwindling with each passing hour. Then, the unthinkable happened. The bodies of the missing teenagers were discovered, their lifeless forms hidden within the desolate expanse of a dusty gravel pit. The sheer brutality of the crime sent a chill down the spines of even the most hardened law enforcement officers. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. This gruesome discovery marked the beginning of a terrifying saga that would span 3 decades, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives and an enduring legacy of fear. The small town of Everman, once an embodiment of idyllic tranquility, would forever bear the scars of McDuff's horrific crimes, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of the ordinary. The investigation into the triple homicide sent shockwaves throughout law enforcement agencies across Texas. Detectives worked tirelessly, following every lead, every whisper, every shred of evidence that might lead them to the perpetrator of this ghastly crime. The pressure mounted with each passing day, the need for justice growing more urgent. As the investigation intensified, a name began to emerge from the shadows: Kenneth McDuff. A local troublemaker with a history of petty crime and a reputation for violence, McDuff quickly became the prime suspect. His troubled past and the chilling similarities between the murders and his previous offenses painted a grim picture. Armed with a warrant, officers apprehended McDuff at his residence. The arrest sent a collective sigh of relief through the community, but the ordeal was far from over. The trial that followed was a spectacle of grim details and chilling testimonies. The prosecution presented a compelling case, meticulously piecing together the evidence that linked McDuff to the murders. The defense fought back, attempting to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. However, the weight of the evidence proved insurmountable. The jury, visibly shaken by the horrific details of the crime, delivered a guilty verdict. Kenneth McDuff, the monster who had terrorized their community, was finally brought to justice, or so they thought. The courtroom was thick with tension as the judge prepared to deliver McDuff's sentence. The families of the victims, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and anticipation, hoped for a punishment that would fit the heinous nature of his crimes. The gravity of the situation hung heavy in the air. The judge, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom, sentenced Kenneth McDuff to death. A collective gasp swept through the room as the weight of the sentence sank in. For the families of the victims, it was a bittersweet victory, a sense of justice served, yet forever intertwined with the irreparable loss they had suffered. McDuff was transferred to Texas's infamous death row, his fate seemingly sealed. He became a ghost, a figure whispered about in hushed tones, his name forever associated with the darkness he had inflicted upon the world. Years turned into decades, and the memory of McDuff's crimes faded into the background for many. However, the families of his victims continued to carry the weight of their loss, their lives forever marked by the tragedy. They never forgot, and they never forgave. In a move that shocked the nation and ignited a firestorm of controversy, Kenneth McDuff was granted parole in 1989. The decision, made by a parole board seemingly oblivious to the magnitude of his crimes, sent shockwaves through Texas and beyond. It was a slap in the face to the victims' families, a betrayal of justice that left them reeling in disbelief and outrage. How could a man convicted of such unspeakable acts, a man sentenced to death, be deemed fit to walk free? The public outcry was immediate and deafening. Protests erupted, demanding answers, demanding accountability. Newspapers ran scathing editorials condemning the parole board's decision, questioning their judgment, and highlighting the potential danger posed by McDuff's release. The families of McDuff's victims, thrust back into the nightmare they had endured decades earlier, became vocal advocates against his release. They shared their stories, their pain, their fear, their outrage with anyone who would listen. Their voices resonated with a nation grappling with the realization that a monster had been unleashed. The parole of Kenneth McDuff became a chilling example of the flawed criminal justice system, a stark reminder that even the most heinous crimes could be met with leniency. It was a travesty that would have far-reaching consequences, as McDuff's reign of terror was far from over. Section 5. The Phantom Returns. A reign of terror resurfaces. The fears of those who protested McDuff's release were tragically realized just 3 years later. In 1991, a wave of disappearances and murders began to plague the state of Texas. The victims, mostly young women, seemed to vanish without a trace, their lives brutally cut short. A chilling familiarity hung over these new cases, a sense of dread that whispered of a familiar evil resurfacing. Law enforcement, haunted by the ghosts of the past, began to suspect that Kenneth McDuff, the monster they had mistakenly set free, had returned to his wicked ways. As the body count rose, so too did the pressure on law enforcement to apprehend the perpetrator. The investigation intensified. Resources poured into tracking down the elusive killer. The specter of McDuff loomed large over the investigation, his name whispered in hushed tones, a chilling reminder of the evil that lurked in their midst. The similarities between the new murders and McDuff's previous crimes were too striking to ignore. The modus operandi, the victim profile, the sheer brutality, it all pointed towards the chilling reality that the Phantom had returned, and this time he was even more brazen, more ruthless than before. Section 6. Relentless Pursuit, the Hunt for Kenneth McDuff. The hunt for Kenneth McDuff became a top priority for law enforcement agencies across Texas. Driven by a mix of duty and a burning desire to right the wrongs of the past, detectives worked tirelessly, following every lead, chasing every shadow, determined to bring the elusive killer to justice. The investigation took them across state lines, chasing down tips, interviewing witnesses, piecing together the fragments of McDuff's life on the run. The pressure was immense, the weight of expectation bearing down on them with each passing day. The families of the victims, their hearts heavy with grief and anger, looked to law enforcement for answers, for justice. The case took a significant turn when a crucial piece of information emerged from an unlikely source. Roy Dale Green, a career criminal and former cellmate of McDuff's, came forward with information about McDuff's whereabouts and his involvement in the recent murders. Green's testimony, though coming from a questionable source, provided valuable insights into McDuff's movements and modus operandi. Armed with this new information, law enforcement finally had a solid lead. The net was closing in on McDuff, the walls of justice slowly but surely constricting around him. The relentless pursuit was about to reach its dramatic climax. Section 7. The walls close in McDuff's final stand. Acting on the information provided by Green, law enforcement tracked McDuff to a Kansas City motel. The fugitive, who had been living under an assumed name, was caught off guard as a SWAT team stormed his room. After years of evading justice, his reign of terror was finally coming to an end. The arrest of Kenneth McDuff sent a collective sigh of relief through the nation. Newspapers splashed his face across their front pages, chronicling his capture and the long list of charges he now faced. For the families of his victims, it was a moment of bittersweet vindication, a sense that justice, though long delayed, was finally being served. The trial that followed was a media spectacle, the eyes of the nation fixed on the courtroom as the prosecution laid out their case against the notorious killer. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA evidence linking McDuff to the recent murders, eyewitness accounts, and the damning testimony of his former cellmate, Roy Green. McDuff's defense team, facing an uphill battle against the mountain of evidence, attempted to portray him as a victim of circumstance, a product of a troubled past. However, their arguments rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming proof of his guilt. The jury, their faces grim, delivered a swift and unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. Section 8, Scars That Time Can't Heal, Legacy of a Killer. The judge, in a voice filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve, sentenced Kenneth McDuff to death for the second time. In 1998, after years of legal battles and appeals, the sentence was carried out. The man who had terrorized Texas for decades, who had cheated justice once before, had finally met his end. The execution of Kenneth McDuff brought a sense of closure, but it could never erase the pain and suffering he had inflicted. The scars of his crimes ran deep, forever etched into the lives of his victims' families and the communities he had terrorized. The case of Kenneth McDuff serves as a chilling reminder of the dark side of human nature, the capacity for evil that can lurk beneath a veneer of normalcy. It also highlights the importance of a vigilant and accountable criminal justice system, one that learns from its mistakes and prioritizes the safety and well-being of its citizens. The legacy of Kenneth McDuff is a complex and troubling one. It is a story of loss, of justice delayed and denied, but also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the unwavering love of families for their lost loved ones, and the dedication of law enforcement officers who work tirelessly to bring criminals to justice. It is a story that will continue to resonate for generations to come, a stark reminder of the importance of confronting evil and fighting for justice.